Next slide. Proto-turkeys. Origin of life protocell assembly is akin to buying 20 pounds of sliced turkey meat, adding a gallon of turkey broth, warming, sticking a few feathers, and suggesting that a live turkey will eventually come gobbling out. If given enough time, or that a proto-turkey or extant turkey has been synthesized. This is exactly what is done in origin of life experiments. It's exactly what is done. If given enough time, a turkey's going to come out. And people buy this stuff. There's a whole area of research called origin of life research, and they've been doing this same thing since 1952.
There are great men and women all around us, and sometimes, oh, my hair looks terrible. History only tells us who the true great men are. And I'm telling you, Dr. James Tour is one of the great men of history and in the conversation for the smartest man alive. Now, I'm not saying he's the smartest man alive, but there's certainly a small group of intellectuals who understand more about reality than anyone else. And Dr. James Tour is one of those men. He is a synthetic chemist. A synthetic chemist. What the heck is a synthetic chemist? This is a guy who understands the physical universe better than most of the people on the planet. And what he's talking about here, the proto-turkey, I picked this as the clip to start off with because it's humorous, but it's a picture of what the people in his field, the evolutionary biologists, he's a synthetic chemist, so they're in overlapping disciplines, right? Molecular biology, synthetic chemistry, these are overlapping disciplines. He understands molecules and molecular biology, right? So this proto-turkey, what he says is if you slice up a turkey and throw it in a pot and blah, 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 eventually a live turkey will come out. And what he's describing there are the experiments done in origin of life research. What is origin of life research? There's a huge, huge problem in the scientific community, particularly in evolutionary biology. There are a number of there are a number of gaps or huge disparities in the continuum, right? Evolutionary biology says everything arises out of naturalistic processes. In other words, the complexity of life that we see now arose from simplicity. And that's counterintuitive, but it's the only godless explanation. It's the only godless explanation for everything that exists. And what he's saying is in the high-tech laboratories, the most advanced laboratories on the planet, we're extremely sophisticated. We humans are pretty innovative and ingenious. And in the controlled environments of the highest tech laboratories, they're trying to figure out where life originated. That's one of the biggest gaps in science is from non-life to life. According to evolutionary biology, that must have happened at least once. And then it just got more and more complex from that point forward. So that transition from things that are not alive, what he's saying, like a sliced up turkey meat, to life, a living, breathing turkey, that's the largest gap in all of I'd say arguably the largest gap certainly in life science, where life originated. You ask the most preeminent molecular biologist, or not molecular biologist, but the most preeminent evolutionary biologist, a guy named Richard Dawkins. He's popular. He's written popular books, but I've seen him interviewed, and even this was one you should look up. Ben Stein interviews Richard Dawkins. And Ben Stein corners him. He says, well, where did life originate? This thing called abiogenesis. Abiogenesis is life to non-life. It must have happened somewhere if it happened at all. According to evolutionary biology, it happened. And Richard Dawkins says, well, we don't know. We don't know. This is the most preeminent evolutionary biologist. We don't know. And he even says, it could have been delivered here by aliens, right? That's called panspermia. That's a theory. We have no idea. Could have come from outer space, but that doesn't solve the question. Where did that life come from, right? If there was life out there that brought life here, that life must have come from somewhere. It just puts off the answer, where that just answers where life on Earth, that potentially answers where life on Earth came from. But what Dr. James here, James Tour, is saying is all of the experiments being currently conducted in laboratories to try and figure out where life came from amount to just taking the pieces that already exist, throwing them in, zapping it with electricity or ether or other chemicals, and saying, well, eventually it'll turn into a living turkey. I mean, it's a really good metaphor, but it emphasizes the wall that science has come up against. And your average person, your average Joe or Jane out there has been led to believe by the academic community that science has created life in a laboratory. In fact, he says it in this. This is an excerpt from a longer discussion with someone, and he says the surveys have been taken that 2/3 of people in this survey, 2/3 believe, well, 1/3 believe that scientists have constructed simple life forms like frogs, like a frog is a simple life form. That's 1/3 of people in this survey believe that scientists have created frogs, something simple like that, arguably simple, in a laboratory. And 2/3 believe that at the very least, scientists have created single cell organisms in the laboratory. And Dr. Tour, it's like, to be a molecular biologist or a synthetic chemist, understanding the chemistry, the building blocks of life. He says that's never been done, and it never will be done. Essentially, in the 1950s, he mentions in this conversation the guys who've done the I forget the names of the guys. They did an experiment where they created an environment and created or assembled an amino acid through, again, it was a controlled environment, but amino acid is a building block of protein. Proteins are building blocks of molecules. Molecules are building blocks of cells. That experiment was so far from creating life, but it is used as evidence that it can be done. Where the science, the field of science has advanced so far that not only has that not been done, but the discoveries they have made since that time push that possibility further and further away. The vast complexity of the molecular world and the way it behaves is so beyond this probabilistic process called Darwinistic gradualism. I got a bunch of directions I want to go, but I want to spend time focusing on this guy real quick. This is going to be a couple episodes. This will be the first episode. I'm going to do a couple episodes on this guy, James Tour. Again, one of the smartest men alive, and he is single-handedly changing the world in his laboratory. And let me just move on to the next clip of him, and I'll give you more of an idea of what this guy deals with in his everyday life.
This is what I do. I build molecules for a living. And this is not unique to me. Many people build molecules for a living. But what happens when you build molecules for a living, you know what they do and what they don't do. You know the kinds of reactions that they undergo. You know what parts of the molecules are going to react under what conditions. And people who have spent years in the laboratory building molecules have a very good understanding on how they react and the things that they do and the things that they don't do. We've made nano cars. We were the first to make nano cars years before anyone else did. We were first to motorize a nano car. These are single molecule cars. They have 4 wheels, independently rotating axles, little motors in them. And you can shine a light and the motor spins at 3 million rotations per second and pushes the car along a surface. We entered the first nano car race that was in France. We worked with a group in Belgium. We designed the car. We built the car. The group from Belgium raced the car. And we finished the race in an hour and a half. And the next group behind us was the Swiss group, and they came in 5 hours behind us. And none of the international groups finished the race after 30 hours. So we know how to build cars. These are so small, you can park 50,000 of them across the diameter of a human hair. So we work in the synthesis of nano cars, nano machines. We've taken these little motors and we drill into cells to kill them. We've done a lot of work in killing cancer cells.
Okay, did you hear that? This guy right here, James Tour, is building molecular machines that kill cancer cells. This guy, so normally a guy with this brain power, you might think he's at a university, and is a professor, and he does. He is a professor. He does teach, but he's in private industry. I'm going to tell you about what he's doing. Some of the things after the next clip, I'm going to tell you about some of the things that he's doing. But when he's talking about we're drilling into cancer cells, so building a molecular car, a single molecule car, like what? Like, yes, that's where human ingenuity and innovation has come. And I'm telling you, this is, I would say he's he's fulfilling God's purpose for his life, certainly. What did God say to Adam? Where did he put him? He put him in a garden. He says, like, no, tend to this garden. And what James Tour here is doing, he's tending to the garden, right? We think of gardening as with a hoe and plowing in the ground and putting some seeds in and, planting over here. But what gardening is, it's manipulating your environment. Gardening is manipulating the reality that God has put in our hands. And James Tour is a molecular gardener. He is creating molecular machines, all right, nanotechnology. Now, obviously, nanotechnology can be used for evil, but it can also be used for good. And James Tour, let me just assure you, James Tour is a Bible-believing Christian. He believes in the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. It's like, well, how can a scientist believe that? Well, how could a scientist not believe it? That's actually the fact. We have been so indoctrinated in our culture that we think scientists, a lot of scientists themselves, think that God has been eradicated from the intellectual domain, right? If you believe in a God, then you're falling short intellectually. You haven't figured out that science has disproven God. Well, the opposite is actually true. And this guy, being one of the smartest men on the planet, understands science better than most people. And he recognizes that it could not have happened unless there were a prime agent, the prime agency that caused it to happen. And I'm not going to go in that direction, but what I'm saying is he is taking his God-given intellect and ability and doing good with it. Nano cars, like what good is a nano car? Well, first of all, I put that clip here to show that he's at the cutting edge. He's at the front edge of this technology. For him to be able to build a molecular car and his team to win a race, which means there's other, scientists and laboratories around the planet that are doing the same thing. He's at the cutting edge, right? Winning that race, a single, molecular car, and how many? It's like 50,000 of them fit across the diameter of a human hair, right? That's what we're talking about. It's not stuff you can see with the naked human eye. Let me play this next clip, and it'll give you an idea. Will give you more of an idea of what he's about.
Understand numbers. They just don't.
All right.
You say $1 million, $1 billion. Right.
This is one of my favorite. I love this little clip here because he is educating. Right. Not only can he talk to scientists at that level, there's a domain of terminology, semantic domain that they use, so he can speak at that level, and you'll hear him. And maybe in this, you'll hear a little bit of it where he's like talking over your head. But here he is trying to articulate to the common man. And that's his mission. He's not only doing this stuff in laboratories and creating stuff that's changing the world right now, but he's making sure it's communicated to the average Joe like you and I. And here's an example of him doing that.
People do not understand numbers. They just don't. You say $1 million, $1 billion, what's the difference? $1 million or $1 billion? Well, let me put it in a way that you understand. 1 million seconds is 11 days. So you ask somebody, will you marry me? I'll tell you in 1 million seconds. Okay. If they say 1 billion seconds, that's 32 years. All right? You feel that now? 1 million to 1 billion? And then if they say 1 trillion seconds, that's 32,000 years. Huh? You see the difference when you go up 3 orders of magnitude? You go 1 million, 10 to the 6th, to 10 to the 9th, to 10 to the 12th. That's 10 to the 79 billion. That number's crazy big. That's just in a single yeast cell, the interactions between the non-bonded interactions. So how does the information flow? Information flows through non-bonded interactions through electrostatic potentials, which physicists call a virtual photon. Information goes down these at the speed of light. That depends on ordering between molecules, non-covalent interactions. These have to be all kind of assembled right. And that's why this information, you don't dehydrate cells and rehydrate them and get them to work properly. When a cell divides, it collapses down, puts the information on both halves, and brings it into both sides. So that that information keeps going to the next and the next generation. Because when you lose these intermolecular interactions that are non-covalent, non-attached, you've lost your information flow. Big problem. Nobody has explained. Nobody in Origin of Life ever mentions the word interactomes.
So there you get an example of the level of what we're talking about with this guy's knowledge. He's talking about the miracle of life. If you discerned in his highfalutin terminology there, he's talking about cells dividing and the information being transferred to both of those cells. That's like cell division is life, right? That's something that's inexplicable. They don't know why it happens. They just observe that it happens. And for the information, the same information to be transferred to both cells has to collapse down and separate. And he's saying when that happens, all of these reactions that take place simultaneously are more than the reactions that take place are more, in each time this happens, are more than the number of elements in the universe, right? So this process is happening in your body right now. Cells are splitting, and et cetera, et cetera. And in biological processes, there are things happening that are inexplicable and cannot be accounted for by random processes. And so this guy is I liken people like this to David's mighty men, right? So King David was surrounded by mighty warriors, and that's literal physical battle. People like this are destroying strongholds, right? We as Christians are called to tear down strongholds, and people like him, born again, Jesus-loving Christians at the highest levels of academia. And he's just an example. And last week we had a video of 3 other big brain guys, and one in particular was a Christian doing the same thing in the realm of philosophy. And so it's encouraging to have a person like this on our side. But he's not just tearing down those strongholds. Like what he's tearing down here is evolutionary biology. He's destroying the myth that any of this could have come about by any natural physical processes. And the number thing he did there is to show you the magnitude, those magnitudes he's talking about reduce the random probabilities. In other words, scientists never say it's 100%. Like, they never use the phrase 100%. Like this didn't happen. It's 100% against it happening. They always say it's improbable, but it's so improbable, right? They use probability. It's so improbable. It's the exact same as impossible, right? It's so improbable. It's impossible. They won't say impossible. It's not in their vernacular. It's not in their semantic domain. But James Tour is educating the next generation of scientists, but he's also in private industry. And so I'm going to share this last clip. And again, this will be at least a two-parter, right? We'll come back next week and talk more, because he gets into, and there's a tease for next week, he gets into primordial soup. the idea of primordial soup. And I'm assuming anybody listening to this understands that phrase primordial soup. You've heard it before, and he gets into that next time. But let me share this video, and I just want to talk about one particular invention that he's talking about.
I heard some people speaking about evolution, and
all right.
I heard.
So this is where he started on all of this, as far as public speaking, becoming a public intellectual. It's one thing to be a scientist in a laboratory or a professor just talking to your class, but he is a public intellectual, and he's explaining when that first happened. So here we go.
And I heard some people speaking about evolution, and I was getting angry because some of the things that were being said I knew chemically could not happen. And then a friend of mine, David Berlinski, said, Jim, why don't you write an article?
All right, I have to pause here because he mentions David Berlinski. Now, for me, I don't know, YouTube recommended this guy to me, I think, or maybe it was a friend of mine who recommended him to me, James Tour here. And so I started watching, I'm like, wow, this guy's incredible. Is this real? It was like too good to be true. Like, is he really? Like, is there really a Christian guy at this level doing this stuff? And so when I heard him say David Berlinski, a friend of mine, David Berlinski, that was all the validation or the vetting I needed. David Berlinski is a mathematician and a public intellectual, and again, one of those guys at the forefront of destroying strongholds, the things, in particular, evolutionary biology. So that he's friends with David Berlinski, it's okay. This guy runs in those circles.
About this. And so I started really digging into the article about this. And a friend of mine, David Berlinski, said, Jim, why don't you write an article about this? And so I started really digging into this and what the claims are. And I wanted to go back to the beginning, pre-evolution. What started this whole thing? And so there's this area called abiogenesis. I had never studied it before. And this is about 6 or 7 years ago, I suppose. And so I started reading about it. I started asking my colleagues. I asked my colleagues, how do they think carbohydrates were first made? How did these molecules start forming? And a friend of mine who's a very talented synthetic chemist, Casey Nicolau, who's here at the university, said, oh, these are made by the Foremost reaction. And so I started looking that up, and other colleagues started sending me some papers by a man named Albert Eschenmoser, the original work on the abiogenical routes to carbohydrates. And I read those, and it was a bunch of nonsense. It showed that this is absolutely how carbohydrates could not have been made. They're too messy. They don't give you the enantiopure compounds that you need. And it was just one paper after another by a litany of people that showed that this is how the chemistry could not have worked. Their own data screamed out, this could not be the way that these things had been made. So I wrote an article on it, and then I got a lot of feedback. I got an invitation to speak on this. So I would go and give a few lectures on this. And then I started getting attacked. And I didn't try to attack anybody. I was just attacking the work. But what was coming back at me were very personal attacks. That I was acting nefariously, that I was saying that people must be, that people, anybody that would believe this is corrupt or stupid or something like that. And I never said that. I never made an ad hominem attack against these people, as far as I know. And if one slipped out, I apologize. But their attack on me was never addressing my scientific claims, never.
So James Tour's on a mission. He's in this. This is a dialogue. He's being interviewed by a guy, and so I took just excerpts of his responses. But one of the things he's talking about is he's going at the work. He's going at the work of the beginning of life science, right? Abiogenesis, origin of life science. He's attacking their work because it's full of nonsense, essentially. He's saying they're making all these leaps. And granted, science is so vast that not everybody can be an expert at everything. That's just not enough hours in the day to be an expert at everything. So, but there are people that make these lazy leaps of faith, right, in their papers. And that's what he's talking about. He reads these papers and like, well, they make this assumption here, but contained within that assumption that they're making is all of this complex chemistry and math that's improbable, right? But they're making that assumption because it has to be made in order to get to this next point that they're making or whatever. So he is on a mission. He's like, he's being attacked. Because he's attacking the Holy Grail, or he's the third rail of academia is to attack evolutionary biology, and that's what he's doing. But he's equipped. He's not like you and I, making a few arguments here and there. This guy will talk over everybody's head. He's going to talk over those scientists' head. He's going to take their papers, the research that they've invested their life into, right? That their credibility is based upon. When you publish a paper, that's everything in academia. When you publish a paper, that's your reputation. That's how people know you. And he's going at the heart of these people and saying, well, you've made some false assumptions here. Your entire premise falls apart because of these false assumptions you've made. And he's like, send me the papers, send me your arguments to refute me. He's ready to take it on, and he's equipped. And so he's on, he says it. He's like, I'm going at it. And so it's a two-pronged assault. He's assaulting the academics who are perpetuating a false narrative, and he's educating the masses, the generations coming up. And it's exciting stuff. And that's the reason I'm doing this series. Like I did last week and the week before, and this with James Tour, and next week with James Tour, is showing you guys, like, we've got warriors, mighty warriors, like David's mighty men on our side that are taking on the enemy and making it, the world a safer place for people like you and I. It's encouraging. It's like the kingdom of God unfolding, taking over the world, taking over academia. So one of the things that this guy has discovered, and I'll just spend we'll do more on this next week, but it's like an invention or a process that it's actually one of his students or one of his lab assistants or one of the people under him that made this discovery. They created something called graphene, and they're able to convert biological material into a single molecular layer of this material called graphene. Now, one molecular layer, like that's so thin, if you couldn't see it laid sideways, right? But it's called graphene, and any carbon-based material, they can convert to this stuff called graphene, and they're finding industrial purposes for graphene. And I'll just point out one in particular. One of the uses for graphene. Now, I want to say two things. One of the uses and one of the side effects of the process. So the usage of graphene, for example, is they can create a bunch of it, and it's apparently fairly cheap to do this. Create a bunch of it and you mix it into concrete, and it increases the tensile strength of that concrete exponentially. I don't know it's like tenfold or something. Don't quote me on that, but increases the durability of concrete. In other words, by mixing in this new ingredient into concrete, you need to use less concrete to get just as much strength. What that means is you will use less material to create better material, less ingredients to create more durable and stronger materials. This is revolutionary. This will bring down our carbon footprint, all that stuff. Like graphene, the way he describes it, is kind of one of those miracle discoveries that can transform, and it's used in a lot of other purposes, but in particular in construction, it's going to make construction cheaper, use less materials, which will be less invasive on the environment, et cetera, et cetera. It's brilliant. The other thing, by converting carbon into graphene, any carbon-based material, he says, trash dumps. Any carbon-based material can be converted into graphene. You can take your trash, the huge dumps where the garbage man takes it, all of that can now be converted into graphene, eliminating waste, reducing waste, and creating, like, taking the environment and taking the bad stuff and converting into useful stuff. That's what I'm talking about here. This is just happening, right? This is new. And people are investing in it. He's got several companies that have been started out of his laboratory, and he talks about that. So just want to encourage you all that God is doing things through people like this, and I just want to bring them to your attention. God is in control.